You know, there's this funny, almost cruel joke that life plays on you when you think you've finally made it. When you think you've built a fortress of comfort so high that the chaos of the real world can't touch you. You spend years grinding, saving, and sacrificing to buy into the dream, believing that a zip code can act like a shield, that a manicured lawn is a barrier against evil. And you never stop to consider that the very walls you built to keep the monsters out might actually be keeping you in with them. For my husband Mark and me, that dream had a name, and it was Oakwood Haven, a neighborhood so pristine, so silent, and so perfectly curated that it felt less like a suburb and more like a film set where nothing bad was ever allowed to happen. We bought the house on the corner, a sprawling colonial with white pillars and a porch that caught the golden hour light just right, believing we were buying peace of mind. But we were wrong, dead wrong. On the night our lives imploded, the air was still, the kind of heavy, humid silence you get before a storm, and I was sitting in the living room with a glass of Merlot, watching Mark sketch architectural drafts at the dining table, while the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. My twin brothers, Jackson and Cole, were due to arrive any second for their annual visit. Two men who had technically retired from the Navy SEALs 3 years ago, but still walked through the world with that terrifying, coiled energy of apex predators who were just waiting for a reason to snap. I was just thinking about how Cole was going to mock my new beige throw pillows when the sound tore through the house. Not a knock, not a polite request for entry, but a concussive boom that rattled my teeth and sent wine sloshing onto my hand. Mark looked up, his pencil freezing mid-stroke, his eyes wide with a confusion that hadn't yet curdled into terror, and before he could even ask, "What was that?" the second hit came, the distinct, mechanical crunch of a battering ram pulverizing the deadbolt. The front door didn't open. It disintegrated, exploding inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal. And suddenly our sanctuary was filled with 3 figures clad in tactical black, moving with a synchronized, fluid lethality that told me immediately. These weren't burglars looking for jewelry. These were operators. They swept into the room like oil spilling across water, weapons raised, faces obscured by balaclavas and dark ballistic goggles, shouting commands that weren't panicked screams but flat, cold orders designed to dominate the psychology of a room instantly. On the ground now, the lead intruder barked, leveling a rifle at my chest, and my world narrowed down to the black void of that barrel, my breath hitching in a throat that felt suddenly packed with sand. Mark, bless his sweet, artistic soul, tried to stand, tried to put himself between me and them, asking, "Who are you?" But the lead man didn't speak. He just moved with a speed that defied his bulk, shoving Mark backwards so hard he flew over the coffee table and hit the floor with a sickening thud. I opened my mouth to scream, a primal, desperate sound rising in my chest. But then the atmosphere in the room shifted, the air pressure dropping as the back patio door slid open, silent as a whisper. I didn't see them enter. I only saw the result, because Jackson and Cole didn't storm in like heroes in a movie. They materialized like ghosts who had been summoned by the violence. The intruder standing over Mark never even turned around before Cole was on him, redirecting the rifle barrel toward the ceiling with one hand, while driving a palm strike into the man's trachea with enough force to collapse a windpipe, dropping him to his knees gagging for air before a sweeping kick sent him unconscious to the hardwood. The second gunman near the kitchen tried to pivot, but Jackson was already inside his guard, moving with a horrifying efficiency, snapping the man's wrist to disarm him, and then transitioning into a sleeper hold that turned the intruder into dead weight in under 4 seconds. The third man, the leader, froze, realizing too late that he wasn't the hunter anymore, and by the time he raised his weapon, he was staring down the barrels of his own team's guns, now held by my brothers. It was over in 15 seconds, a quarter of a minute that destroyed our reality, leaving the room smelling of gun oil, sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. Jackson zip-tied the leader's hands with a calm that was almost more frightening than the violence, while I scrambled to call 911, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely hit the buttons. But Jackson wasn't looking at the men's faces, he was patting down their vests, his expression darkening as he pulled out a heavy, blocky device from a pouch, something that looked like a radio but felt denser, colder. "Sarah, look at this," he whispered, holding it up to the light. This is a kinetic data bridge, military-grade encryption hardware used for field ops. You don't buy this at a surplus store, and you definitely don't bring it to a robbery. When the police finally arrived, the relief I expected never came, because the lead officer, Detective Reynolds, walked in with a slow, bored swagger, looking at the unconscious men and the shattered door with the disinterest of a man waiting for his lunch break. When Jackson tried to show him the device, explaining that these men were a highly trained paramilitary unit, Reynolds just chuckled, took the device, and shoved it into his pocket without even logging it into evidence. Probably just a signal jammer, son. Thieves use him to kill the alarms, he said, waving his hand dismissively. You boys did a good job, but we'll take it from here. Looks like a misunderstanding. Wrong house maybe. They dragged the intruders out, leaving us standing in the wreckage of our living room. And as the sirens faded, a cold realization settled over me. Reynolds hadn't just been incompetent, he had been obedient. We weren't safe, we were exposed, and as Mark nailed plywood over the door frame, I went to my computer, my analyst brain needing to make sense of the chaos. I started digging into the Oakwood Haven Homeowners Association records, pulling at the loose threads of the budget until the fabric unraveled, revealing a massive, recurring payment to a shell company in the Caymans, which funneled money directly to a private military contractor called Blackwatch Dynamics. I was staring at the screen, realizing that our HOA fees were funding a private army, when the doorbell rang the next morning, making us all jump. It was Mr. Henderson, the elderly neighbor from across the street, a man who grew prize-winning roses and always waved when we got the mail. He was holding a potted orchid, his face etched with concern, asking if we were okay, but as he handed me the plant, he squeezed my hand with a surprising strength, his eyes darting to the street. Be careful, my dear, he whispered, his voice trembling. This place, the walls have ears. Later, when I went to water the orchid, I found a tiny, folded note buried in the soil, wrapped in plastic, containing 5 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. They are watching. Trust no one. I showed it to Jackson, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in my brother's eyes, not for himself, but for us, because we weren't just victims of a crime anymore. We were prisoners in a war zone disguised as a paradise. The atmosphere in the house shifted from shock to a siege mentality, the blinds drawn tight against the sun, every shadow looking like a threat, every passing car sounding like an approaching tank. Mark was trying to hold it together, but I could see him crumbling, his rational, structured architect's mind unable to process a world where the police were the enemy and our neighbors were passing secret notes in flower pots. We sat at the kitchen table while Jackson and Cole paced like caged tigers, and finally, Jackson dropped the bomb that connected all the dots, his voice low and haunted by ghosts I didn't know he carried. Blackwatch Dynamics isn't just a security firm, Sarah, he said, staring at his hands. They're mercenaries, the kind governments hire when they want to deny involvement, dirty work, assassinations, coups d'etats. He looked up, and the pain in his eyes was raw. 5 years ago, in a dusty village in Syria, our team walked into an ambush, bad intel, a setup. We lost our point man, Danny, my best friend, and we later found out the intel came from a Blackwatch liaison who sold us out to cover their own illegal arms deal. The room went dead silent, the weight of the coincidence crushing us, until Cole slammed his fist into the wall, cracking the plaster. It's not a coincidence, he snarled. We're here, and now they're here. It's Victoria Sterling. I knew the name. She was the developer of Oakwood Haven, the billionaire recluse who marketed this place as the ultimate safe harbor for the elite. But according to my brothers, she was also the silent majority shareholder of Blackwatch, a woman who profited from chaos and sold safety at a premium. Somewhere deep beneath the community clubhouse, in a room filled with monitors, Victoria Sterling was watching us. I knew it. I could feel her gaze through the hidden cameras Cole had found embedded in the street lamps. She had built this neighborhood not as a community, but as a containment zone for high-value targets, criminals, and warlords who wanted to retire in American suburbia. And we were the glitch, the normal family who had accidentally bought a house on top of a blind spot in her surveillance grid. The tension broke when Cole, unable to sit still, slipped out the back door, and tracked one of the landscapers who had been loitering near our driveway for hours. He dragged the man, a thug named Vargas, into our basement, and after 10 minutes of terrifyingly quiet interrogation, Cole came back up, wiping blood from his knuckles. Vargas talked, he said grimly. They want us out. Victoria needs this house to close the security loop, and since we didn't sell, she's going to break us. And then, the counterattack began, but not with guns. The next morning, a fleet of black SUVs swarmed our driveway, and men in FBI windbreakers pounded on the door, not to help us, but to arrest Mark. They stormed in with warrants, claiming Mark was the mastermind behind a massive international wire fraud scheme, citing evidence that had been planted on his servers overnight. I screamed. I cried. I tried to pull him back, but they handcuffed my gentle, innocent husband and dragged him away, leaving me sobbing in Jackson's arms while Detective Reynolds watched from his cruiser with a smug smirk. We were drowning, gasping for air, and just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Cole spotted Mr. Henderson sneaking out of his house to meet a man in a gray suit, handing over a thick envelope. Cole followed him, cornering the old man in his garage, and the truth came out. Henderson wasn't a kindly ally. He was a handler, a retired spy on Victoria's payroll whose job was to monitor the civilian assets. The warning note had been a psychological game, a way to ramp up our paranoia and make us more likely to flee. That evening, a sleek limousine pulled up, and a woman who introduced herself as Victoria Sterling's legal counsel stepped out, placing a document on our dining table with a cold, reptilian smile. It's a simple choice, really, she said, smoothing her skirt. Sign the house over to the holding company for $1. Sign this non-disclosure agreement, and leave the state immediately. Do that, and the charges against your husband vanish like smoke. She leaned in, her perfume smelling expensive and cloying. Refuse, and Mark will die in federal prison, and you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. She gave us 24 hours to decide. We sat in the darkening living room, the contract sitting there like a death sentence, the house feeling empty without Mark, the silence ringing in our ears. Jackson looked at me, his face hard as stone, and said, if we sign, they win, and they'll probably kill us anyway to tie up loose ends. I looked at the paper, then at the empty chair where Mark should have been sketching, and I felt something snap inside me. Not a break, but a hardening, a transformation from victim to soldier. We're not signing, I whispered, grabbing the pen and stabbing it through the paper. We're going to burn their kingdom down. The despair that had been suffocating me evaporated, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp rage that clarified everything. We didn't have weapons, we didn't have the law, but we had something Victoria Sterling didn't account for. We had nothing left to lose. Jackson pulled a burner phone from his bag, a relic from his operating days, and dialed a number he swore he'd never use again, calling Agent Miller, a high-ranking FBI integrity officer he had worked with in Syria, the only person in the bureau who hated Blackwatch as much as we did. She was skeptical, terrified even, telling us we needed hard proof, physical servers, undeniable data, before she could move against a billionaire with Pentagon contracts. We'll get it, Jackson promised, his voice devoid of doubt. Tonight, we drew up the plan on the back of the rejected contract, a suicide mission on two fronts. I was the distraction, the digital arsonist. I sat at my computer, hacking into the Oakwood Haven maintenance grid, overloading the power substations and triggering a cascade of false alarms that screamed, fire, in every mansion on the block. As the sirens wailed and the private security teams scrambled to contain the chaos, Jackson and Cole moved. They didn't sneak, they hunted. Dressed in tactical gear they had stashed in their trunks, they moved through the shadows of the manicured hedges toward the clubhouse, the nerve center of the beast. I guided them through the comms, watching the security feeds I had hijacked. 2 tangos at the north gate, clear left? I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched on the screen as my brothers flowed through the clubhouse, silencing guards with brutal, non-lethal precision, descending into the hidden elevator shaft that led to the bunker. They found the server room, a freezing cold fortress of blinking blue lights, but standing between them and the data was Vargas, the mercenary, waiting with a combat knife and a grin. The fight was ugly, visceral, a brawl in a confined space where every hit sounded like a gunshot. Cole took a slash to the arm, but didn't falter, tackling Vargas into a server rack, shattering it, while Jackson ripped the primary hard drive from the mainframe. But the real prize was in the holding cell adjacent to the server room. Mark, bruised, terrified, but alive. They grabbed him, grabbed the drive, and ran, just as Victoria Sterling's elite guard realized the diversion was fake and swarmed the tunnels. Get to the extraction point. I screamed into the mic, watching red dots converge on their position on my screen. I executed the final command, a kill switch script I wrote that fried the cooling systems of the bunker, plunging the enemy into darkness and steam. They burst out of the clubhouse emergency exit, dragging Mark, lungs burning, legs pumping, running straight into the blinding headlights of a convoy coming up the street. For a second, I thought it was over, thought we were dead. But then, the doors opened, and Agent Miller stepped out, flanked by 50 armed federal agents in raid jackets. She looked at Jackson, at the blood dripping from Cole's arm, and at the hard drive in his hand. "You crazy sons of bitches," she muttered, suppressing a smile. "You actually did it." The raid was swift and absolute. We watched from our porch as the FBI dragged Victoria Sterling out of her underground lair in handcuffs, her perfect suit ruined, her face a mask of shock. We saw Detective Reynolds arrested by his own department, weeping as they put him in the car. It was the most beautiful sunrise I had ever seen. Months later, the neighborhood is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. The orchid Mr. Henderson gave me sits on the windowsill, dead, a reminder of the lies we survived. We're rebuilding the door, Mark is seeing a therapist, and my brothers are finally, truly retired, sleeping on my couch with one eye open. We won, yes, and justice was served in a way that felt like a movie ending, but late at night, I stare at the ceiling and wonder. We had to become criminals to catch criminals. We had to use violence to stop violence. Victoria Sterling is in prison, but the system that created her, the demand for privatized safety, the fear that makes people lock themselves in cages of their own making, that's still out there. We took down one monster, but did we just prove that the only way to be safe in this world is to be a bigger monster than the ones hunting you? I look at Mark sleeping beside me, safe only because my brothers knew how to break bones, and I have to ask, in a world like this, is there really such a thing as an innocent civilian anymore? Or are we all just waiting for our turn to fight?